It's not just here at home where citizens are outraged by police brutality. In the United States, police officers are back in the spotlight after the killing of yet another black man, Daniel Prude. Prude suffered from mental health issues and died after being put in a spit hood designed to protect officers from detainees' saliva. The police union chief said officers involved in the suffocation death were following their training step by step. To unpack the story and others of police brutality in the United States, I'm joined now by Devin Barrington Ward, who's the managing director of the Black Futurists Group and former Georgia State Senate candidate. Good evening. Thank you so much for your time tonight. It certainly is, something that really boggles the mind as to how officers continue to find themselves in trouble over the same issue over and over again.
Well, it's because of the system of policing. The system of policing is not designed to protect people of color. It's not designed to protect black people. And then oftentimes it was designed from its inception. The first police department in the United States was the Charleston Watch, which was responsible for slave patrol and capturing fugitive slaves. And so we've seen the system of policing expand beyond that to suppress labor movements as well. And ultimately, many people who are black in this country feel as though that the police main responsibility is to protect the white citizenry and also to protect property that is owned by the white citizenry. And while there are black people who definitely want to see, public safety and some form of law enforcement in their community. There was a recent survey by Yahoo News that saw that while 49% of black people who were surveyed acknowledged that they need some sort of law enforcement in their communities, another 49% also responded and said that they are more concerned about police brutality than they are about minor crime in their community. And so we continue to be at a crossroads where people want to feel safe, but the people who are responsible and taking up millions and millions and billions of dollars across the country to supposedly keep communities safe don't do that. Not only do they not keep communities safe because they are a reactionary force in the sense that they are not actually preventing crime, but they oftentimes are engaging in crime and harm against our communities. And the story of Daniel Prude is just another example of how the police are oftentimes the perpetuator of violence in black communities.
And you look at a story like Daniel Prude's. I mean, the U.S. police officers are said to have been following, their procedures, their training step by step. And these are words that are said by the officers' union chief. Mm-hmm. Certainly, this is very disturbing and almost a slap in the face of those who really watched that video and were really appalled at that apparent injustice.
Absolutely. And oftentimes what is said when organizations that are affiliated with the Movement for Black Lives and our demands to defund police and reimagine public safety, oftentimes the reactionary response from many of the elected officials is, well, police need more training. Well, we see that they are trained, and the training oftentimes leads to the demise and the harm and the violence inflicted towards black people. So it is not an issue of training. It's an issue of the entire system of policing must be dismantled, defunded, and we need to reimagine public safety in this country. But also we see that the form of U.S. policing is exported around the globe. And so black people and people of color are oftentimes not safe, not just in the United States, but globally as it pertains to public safety and policing.
Do you think the words of the president, the remarks of the president over some of these incidents that we have been seeing are helping matters?
Absolutely not. Matter of fact, they make it worse. And before 45 was in office, elected to office, when he was campaigning, at his campaign rallies, when there were peaceful protesters who had come to be in disagreement with the rhetoric that he was propagating through his campaign, we saw that when folks were removed, that he encouraged security officials at those campaign rallies to be brutal, to rough them up, to, one of the quotes I believe is, I remember in the good old days, they weren't so nice to those type of people. And so we saw this type of rhetoric when he was running for office, and now that he is in office, it has been further emboldened, and we see it translated to the way that law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level interact with Black people or people who are standing up for the rights of Black people. We saw federal officers in Portland kill a protester that is associated and affiliated with Black Lives Matter, kill a protester after they were engaging what they said was self-defense. Police do not get to play judge, jury, and executioner. And so that is oftentimes the issue with policing is that folks are not entitled to the benefit of the doubt, and oftentimes that lack of being entitled to the benefit of the doubt is associated more when you have more melanin in your skin.
And apart from police and of course, those issues of brutality that continue to come up, how has the criminal justice system been? Are we seeing more and more of, those officers that are perpetrating such acts behind bars, or even in some of those unreported cases, are we seeing them walk away scot-free?
So actually, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post that talked about how since 2015, after the uprisings in Ferguson, after the killing of Mike Brown, another unarmed Black man, a young man in Missouri, that after that there were more arrests of police officers who had engaged in brutal behavior, killing, unjustified use of force, etc. But what it also highlighted was that we were not successful in convictions. And so it also speaks to, we can arrest police officers, but if prosecutors are not encouraged to give very strong cases, if juries are not encouraged to dismantle what we talk about, the cop in people's head versus the cop in reality. In America, we have a lot of law enforcement shows, and people oftentimes associate these fictitious law enforcement shows with how law enforcement actually conduct themselves in reality in communities that are Black and brown. And so what we have seen is that oftentimes that juries, particularly if they are juries that lack an appropriate amount of people of color, Black people in the jury pool, that they will choose to not prosecute police officers, that they will choose to find these officers not guilty. And so that is one of the concerns is that we have to do two pieces of work. We have to do the reform work needed, the important practical reforms that take steps towards dismantling, defunding, and reimagining public safety. Because in that moment, Mr. Daniel Prude could have had a mental health counselor respond rather than law enforcement that are trained to respond and suppress a threat rather than responding to a crisis in community that requires compassion, concern, and oftentimes more of a mental health practice. In addition to that, we also have to do the work culturally to really shift people from this idea that the police are always the good guys and that the police are stopping crime and that the police are always solving crime. There was a astounding statistic that showed that over 80% in a newspaper in Chicago that showed over 80% of serious crimes go unsolved by police. So one must ask themselves, well, if the crimes are not being solved, and then when you are responding to things that truly require a public safety response, we are not getting that. When we require a response that is to de-escalate, rather we're seeing the escalation. And then when people are upset by the behavior and the conduct of the police, when they take to the streets, there's further violence from the police because they are indiscriminately throwing tear gas, rubber bullets that take people's eyes out, and sometimes even using live ammunition. And so one has to ask themselves, when we're confronted with all of those things, is policing working? And the resounding answer is no. And so if policing is not working, then of course we are indemnified to come up with an alternative, and that is required through the reimagining of public safety so that we have more mental health support for people in community that are in crisis, so that many of the folks who are in our jails and prisons in this country are there for nonviolent drug offenses. I live in a city like Atlanta that is called the Black Mecca, but we have no major mental health crisis center that is not a jail. We don't have a sobering center for people who are struggling with substance abuse and alcoholism. And much of our crime resolves around those issues. And so I am convinced, along with many of the folks who are a part of the movement for Black Lives, that we must defund police, that we must dismantle police like the city of Minneapolis is in the process of doing, and we must reimagine public safety. And the reimagining of public safety doesn't mean anarchy on our streets. It just means that we're actually centering the safety of everyone and not just the safety of some people.
As a final question from me tonight, when you're reimagining a safety, there's also the spit hood that, is also being, really under the spotlight right now. There was a chokehold during the time when George Floyd was killed. These are also other things that have been part of police officers' practices, and surely they cannot stay.
No, they can't. But I am convinced that they will stay so long as we continue to support this current system of policing. And then so until we reimagine public safety, we will be stuck with these type of responses from policing, because that's how they're trained. And they're very comfortable with being trained that way, and oftentimes take a very much it is what it is attitude about it.